Hello, everyone. I welcome you guys again in this Scalar Academy's live session. So, in this particular live session, we decided let's actually do something about Python interview questions. So, Python is a language which is used across a lot of industries and it is used across the world. So whether you're working in an e-commerce industry, or maybe it's a biotech industry, or maybe if you're an academician, Python is widely used and it has a lot of different purposes. And the best part about Python, as I've been stating, is with the help of it, you can probably do web development, you can develop games with it, and you can also implement data science and machine learning tasks with this amazing language. So now that we've understood Python is so amazing, let's actually see what does it actually take to crack those Python related interviews. And since there are a lot of aspects related to Python, what we'll do is in this particular live session, we'll cover almost everything that is there in Python to cover. So Python is a magical language and you can do a lot of things with it. So whatever you want to do, Python springs up a library for that purpose. So let's say if you'd want to do web development, Python gives out a library for that. Similarly, let's say if you'd want to do game development, Python again gives out a library for that. If you'd want to do any of the data science or machine learning related tasks, Python again gives out a library for that. So now that we know Python has all of these varied purposes. So as I've been stating, we'll be focusing on all of the different things that Python can do. Now that we know what we'll do is we'll start off with the basic stuff. Let me go ahead and share my screen over here. And let's start off this live session by understanding some of the basic features of Python. So this Python interview questions live session will be conducted in such a way that we'll be understanding all of the Python fundamentals through this set of questions. Let's start up by understanding what exactly is Python. Now, Python is platform independent. So what exactly do I mean when I say Python is a platform independent language? Well, the answer is pretty simple. You can run Python on any operating system. Let's say if you have a Mac operating system, if you have a Mac, you would have iOS. Similarly, let's say if you have a Windows laptop, or maybe if you're running a Linux system, whatever the operating system is, you can run Python on top of it. Now, this is very beneficial because let's say if you're a developer who probably is working on a Mac, and you develop your entire app on this Mac system, but your client does not have a Mac, your client probably has a Windows laptop. Now, it is necessary that the same application is able to properly run on your client's laptop as well. And this is where, since Python is a platform independent language, whether you develop your application on a Windows laptop or on a Mac laptop, it really doesn't make a difference because it's platform independent. And this is what is meant when I say Python is platform independent. Going ahead, Python is also an object-oriented programming language. So we hear this term object-oriented programming a lot, but what does it actually mean? So in simple terms, let's understand object-oriented programming this way. Now, when you look around you, what do you actually see? You'd see a lot of objects, isn't it? So let's say I have this bottle beside me. What exactly is this? This is a real life object. Similarly, what I have over here is a phone. What exactly is this phone? This phone again is a real life object. Now, if I'd have to represent all of these real life objects in a programming paradigm, what I would need is an object-oriented programming language. Isn't that very simple? So we have a lot of object-oriented programming languages out there. And one of those very important object-oriented programming languages is Python. So obviously with the help of Python, we can represent all of these real-life objects in a programming roadmap or in a programming blueprint. Then Python is also a dynamically typed programming language. Now, what do I mean by this? I have something called as a statically typed programming language and dynamically typed programming language. So let's understand this by opening up Jupyter Notebook. So I'll just open up Jupyter Notebook over here. Now, if you have worked with other programming languages such as C, C++, or Java, to work with variables, what you would normally do is, let's say, write in something like, let me also increase the size of this so that it's much more visible to you. Right, so let's say if you'd have to create an integer variable, you will write something called as int a. Similarly, if you'd have to create maybe a Boolean value, so you will write something called as bool b. Similarly, if you'd have to create a character variable, you will write down char c. And now this is what is known as a statically typed language. What you are doing is you are predefining a data type to the variable which you are creating. Right, so let's say if I write int a, this would mean that I am creating a variable called as a, which can only hold integer type values. But this is not the case when it comes to a dynamically typed programming language. So let's say if I have a variable called as a, the data type of variable a would be determined on the basis of the value which I store in this. So let's say if I store a value such as 37 in this variable, let me just hit enter. And if I check the type of this, type of a, and you would see that this is an integer. Now, similarly, what I'd want to do is, let's say instead of storing the value 37, I would probably store a string value. And let me go ahead and store over here Scalar Academy. Now, if I check the type of this, type of a, you would see that this is a string. So what is happening over here is the data type of this variable is dynamically being decided. And that is why we call Python a dynamically typed programming language. And Python is also a strongly typed language. Now, what exactly is a strongly typed language? Let's also see an example for that. So let's say if I try to do something such as 12 plus a, I get an error. And in the error, you see unsupported operand type for int and string. Now, this is because this is strongly typed, which would mean that this is fixed, this is an integer, this is also fixed, this is a string, and you can't combine these two different types together. But on the other hand, let's say if I'm working with JavaScript, now what I'd want to do is I'd want to view the page source, not probably the page source. I'd probably want to inspect this. Let me click on inspect, and over here, probably I'll go ahead and go to console. And in console, let's say if I type in 1, I'll have 1. Similarly, let's say if I have a over here, I'll have a. Now, if I do something like a 1 plus a, you'd see that I have this in the result. Right, so 1 is an integer, a is a string, and when I do 1 plus a, this 1a entirely what is happening is this is being concatenated into this entire string. So this is a weakly typed language, but Python is a strongly typed language, and that is why you cannot just combine this integer and this variable together. So I hope you guys properly understand the difference between a weakly typed language and a strongly typed language. So now that we have understood this, what we'll do is we'll go to the next question. So we've covered what exactly is Python. So Python is platform independent, which would mean that you can run Python on any of the operating system which you have. Then Python is also an object-oriented programming language, which would mean that you can represent all of the real-world entities in a programming paradigm. Going ahead, Python is a dynamically typed language, which would mean that the data type of a variable would be dependent on the value which you give inside it. And it is also a strongly typed language, which would mean that if you, let's say, have integer, that cannot be combined directly with a string type. So this was our first question. Now, let me go ahead to the next question. So we are supposed to explain about the different types of operators in Python. And we've got some basic operators, which are arithmetic operators, relational operators, and conditional operators. So let's work with all three of them over here. Let me just bring this over here and let me add a comment. So I shall just write down operators over here. And as the name states, with the help of operators, we can perform basic operations. Now, I will also write down the three types of operators, so which would be arithmetic. After this, I've got something called as relational, and then I've got something called as logical. So I've got arithmetic operators, relational operators, and logical operators. Now, after this, what I'd want to do is I'd want to start off by working with the arithmetic operators. So I'll have a variable called as a, and in this variable a, I'll store the value, let's say 35. Now I'll have another variable called as b, and in this I'll store the value 67. Now I'd want to work with the basic arithmetic operators. So the basic arithmetic operators would be, let me add another comment over here. So this would be addition, subtraction, then I'll have multiplication. After that, I'll also have division. And now, let me go ahead and perform these operations on top of these two variables. So let's say if I write down a plus b over here, I get 102. And that is because 35 plus 67 is equal to 102. Similarly, if I go ahead and perform a minus b over here, I'll get minus 32 because 35 minus 67 is equal to minus 32. Going ahead, let me multiply these two values. So I'll have a star b. And when I multiply a with b, I get a value of 234y because that is the result. And then finally, let me divide a by b. So here I shall just write down a divided by b, and I get a value of 0.5 because 35 divided by 67 is equal to this particular value. So again, I hope all of you are understanding this properly, and if you have any questions, you can put them up in the chat. So Anil is asking, I have one question regarding Scalar Academy. I've opted for that course and want to know, does knowing only Python will help me into getting product-based companies? So when you talk about getting into product-based companies, knowing just one language, that is only one of the prerequisites. So what actually happens in the product-based company is you would need to be good with data structures and algorithms, and you would need to be able to implement these data structures and algorithms properly with at least one of the object-oriented programming languages. And that would totally depend on you. So you can either pick Python, you can either pick Java, you can either pick C++. So whatever language you're comfortable with, you can pick any of these languages. And with that tool or with that language, you would need to be able to properly implement all of the data structures and algorithm concepts properly. So I hope that answers your question. Now, going ahead, we have looked at arithmetic operators. Next up, we'll also look at relational operators. I'll add another comment over here. Let me just write down relational operators. And relational operators, we will have less than, greater than, and not equal to. After this, we'll also have double equal to. And again, as the name states, with the help of relational operators, we'll be able to understand the proper relation between two operands. So here, what I shall do is, again, I'll probably have two variables. I'll have x. Inside x, I'll store the value 12. Then I'll have another variable called as y. And in y, I'll store the value 15. And I'd want to understand the relationship between x and y. So if I want to understand the relationship, what I'll do is, so let me just start off by writing x less than y. So when I put x less than y, I get a true value because 12 is less than 15. Now, if I go ahead and change this to greater than, so x greater than y, I get a false value. And I get a false value because 12 is obviously not greater than 15. Now, let me go ahead and change this. Let me put not equal to over here. And when I run this, I get a true value because obviously 12 is not equal to 15. So this symbol which you see, exclamation mark followed by equal to, that is called as the not equal to operator. Then finally, we have the double equal to operator, which would help us to compare the value in two different operands. So now when I execute this, I can get a false because obviously 12 is not equal to 15, and that is why it is a false. So these are some basic relational operators which you have focused on. Going ahead, we shall focus on, we've got logical operators. Let me add a comment for that as well. So here I shall write down logical operators. Now, in logical operators, we'll have two things. We'll have the AND operator and we will have the OR operator. Now, when we talk about AND operator, it will give us a true result only when both of the operands are true. When it comes to the OR operator, we'll get a true result when either of the operands is true. So here again, I shall have two variables. Let me have one variable called as m, and in this variable, I'll store true. Then I'll have another variable n, and inside this, I'll store the value false. So now that I have these two variables ready, what I'd want to do is I'd want to compare these two with the help of the AND operator. So I'll start off by writing m and n. I get a false because true and false is equal to false. Now let me change this. Let me change true to be equal to false and false to be equal to true. Now after this, when I again run m and n, I again get a false value. Now I get a false value because false and true is also equal to false. Going ahead, I'd want both of the cases to be false. So m I have false, n I have false. So false and false again is equal to false. And the final case, what I'd want to do is I'll store true in this variable m, and I shall also store true in this variable n. Now, when I have m and n, I get a true value. So true and true is equal to true. So let me reiterate this. We shall get a true result only when both of the cases are true. As simple as that, and that is how the AND operator works. Now going ahead, we shall work with the OR operator. So OR operator, as I've told you, it gives us a true result when either of the operands is true. So we will start off with the same set of values. I'll write m or n. I get true because true or true is equal to true. Now let me change this to be equal to false, and let me directly run this. I'll get a true result again because true or false is also equal to true. Let me change this. Let me make this false, and let me make n to be equal to true. Now if I run this again, I can get a true result. And finally, when I make both of these cases to be false and I run this, now I get a false value, because we'll get a false only when both of the operands are false when it comes to the OR operator. So these are the different types of operators when it comes to Python. Now we'll head to the next question. So what is a tuple in Python? So this is a very interesting question. Let me add a comment for that. So here I shall write down tuple. So till now, what we've been doing is we've been looking at basic variables. And what happens in a variable is you can only store one value at a time. But what if I want to store multiple values at a single go? And for that purpose, we'll have different data structures. So part of those different data structures will have tuple, list, set, and dictionary. And tuple is one of the most primary one of them. So you can create a tuple like this. So what I'm doing is I'm writing T1, and I can create a tuple by using these round braces. And inside these, I'll just give in a bunch of values. So let me just write down 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I'm storing this in this object called as T1. And now let me print out T1. I've got this. Let me also check the type of this. Type of T1, and you shall see that this is equal to a tuple. So a tuple is basically a collection of elements, and a tuple is immutable. Now, what do I mean when I say tuple is immutable? That would mean that once you create a tuple, you cannot change the values which are present inside it. So we've created this, and whatever values are inside this, that cannot be changed. Now, since that we've created this, and also it's not necessary that all of the elements are of the same type. So you can have homogeneous elements as well as heterogeneous elements inside a tuple. So right now we only have homogeneous elements because we've only got integers over here. Let me create another tuple where probably I'll have a mixture of maybe integers. I'll have Boolean values as well, and I'll have a couple of string values as well. And let me store this in a new tuple and call it as T2. Now let me print out T2 over here. And as you see, I've been able to create this. And just to confirm if it's a tuple or not, let me check the type. And inside the type method, I will pass in t2. And you would see that this again is a tuple, and I was able to store all of these values inside this. So this is how we can work with the tuple, and it's quite simple. So now that we have created this, so what I'd want to do is, let's say if I'd want to extract individual elements from this tuple. So that for that purpose, I would need indexing. So I'll write down T2, and from this tuple T2, if I'd want to extract the first element. So in Python, you'd have to understand that the indexing starts from 0, not from 1. So the first element is present at index 0. Second element is present at index 1. Third element is present at index 3, index 2, and so on. So let's say if I want to extract this first element, so first element is present at index 0. So I'll just write 0 over here. And when I hit enter, I get 1 because this is the element which I've extracted. Similarly, if I want to extract true, true over here is present at index number 2. So I shall write down T2, and inside parentheses, I'll give in the index number, which is 2. And as you see, I was able to extract this particular element. So this is how we can extract elements. And similarly, let's say if I have to extract the last element. So for this, we have an interesting use case. Normally, to extract the last element, I can just write down -1 over here. And as you see, I was able to extract the last element C from this. So now that we have extracted all of these elements, now let's go to the next question. So how do you repeat the elements in a tuple? So if I have to repeat the elements in a tuple, let me just print out T1 over here. In T1, as you see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, if I'd want to repeat the same set of elements again and again, I can just multiply this variable with a particular value. So here I shall write down T1 into 2. When I write down T1 into 2, you shall see that I've repeated the elements 2 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this is happening 2 times. Similarly, let's say if I have T1 into 3, you shall see that this is repeating 3 times. Again, if I, let's say, change this, if I have 4 over here, you shall see that this is repeating 4 times over here. So these are basic things which would happen in a tuple. So we have next question over here. Now, how do you find the sum of elements in a tuple? So if I want to find out the sum of elements in a tuple, again, I will take the same one. So T1, I have all of these values. What I can do is I can just use sum. I will pass T1 inside this. So let's add this up. 5 plus 4 is 9, 9 plus 3 is 12, 12 plus 2 is 14, 14 plus 1 is 15. So if I have all of the elements to be integers, and if I just want to directly add them up, I can just use the sum method. And with the help of the sum method, I can add all of the values which are present in this tuple. So I hope you guys are clear with this. Now let's get on to the next question. So how do you find the frequency of different elements in a tuple? This is interesting. So I'm supposed to find out the frequency of different elements in a tuple, which would mean that I'd want to know the number of times an element is repeating. So again, I will create a tuple. I'll call this T3. And what I'll do is I'll have elements like this. So I have 1 repeating twice, 2 repeating thrice, and 3 repeating 4 times. So I've created this tuple. Let me print it out for you guys. Now we have something called as a counter. So let me just go ahead and import that. So here I shall write down from collections import counter, and I can directly pass in this tuple inside this counter. Let me use this inside the counter. I'll pass in T3, and you see that I get a dictionary, and dictionary obviously has a key value pairs. So key is the number, value is number of times that number is repeating. So here 1 is repeating 2 times, 2 is repeating 3 times, and 3 is repeating 4 times. So if we want to find out the frequency of the different elements in a tuple, what we can do is just use counter, which is part of the collections library. So again, I hope this is clear to all of the folks who are watching this. Now, let me go back and see what is the next question. So we are done with the questions on tuples. Now let's go to the list. What exactly is a list? So this again is interesting. Let me add another comment over here. So what I'll do is I'll probably add a couple of new lines, and here I shall add a comment. I'll call it list. So before understanding list, let's understand the difference between a tuple and a list. When it came to a tuple, the tuple itself was immutable, which would mean that you cannot change the elements which are present in it once you create it. But a list is mutable. Now, when I say list is mutable, once you create a tuple, you can change whatever is present inside that. And so if you create a tuple with the help of round braces, you shall create the list with the help of square braces. So these are some basic differences between a tuple and a list. Now let me just go ahead and create a tuple over, actually a list over here. So I shall write down L1 and I'll create a list, and let me pass in some values over here. So I've created a list L1. I have all of these values inside this. Now what I'd want to do is I'd want to check the type of this as well, type L1, and you shall see that this is a list. So now that I've created a list and I've also told you that this is immutable, I'll show you how it works. So initially at index number 0, I have the value 1. Let me try to change that value. L1, I'll give in the index, which is equal to 0, and let me try to change the value. So initially the value is 1. I'd want to change that value to 100. So let me give in 100. Now let me print out L1 over here. So you would see that initially we had this list where the element which is present at index number 0, the value of it was equal to 1. Now, since this list is mutable, we have successfully changed that value from 1 to 100. So this is how we can say that a list is mutable. Going ahead, what I'd want to do is I'd want to show this difference with the list. So with a tuple actually. So let me print out T1 over here. Now, if I'd want to change this value from 1 to 100, we'll get an error. So T1 index 0 is equal to 100. And when I run this, you get this error. And if you read this error properly, you will see that tuple object does not support item assignment. And why doesn't it support item assignment? Because tuple is immutable. So as simple as that. And this is the basic difference between a tuple and a list. So now that we've looked at these basic things, let's go to the next question. So how can you use the append method with list? This is interesting. So with the help of the append method, we can add new elements, or we can append new elements into the existing list. So again, let me print down L1 over here, and then L1, we have all of these elements. So at the back end of this list, I'd want to append a new value. So I'll just write down L1 dot append, and probably I'll give in 7 over here, and let me hit execute. Now let me print L1. You would see that I was able to successfully append this value 7 at the end of this list. Now, it's not necessary that I can only insert one value at a time. I can probably insert a tuple inside this. I can probably insert a list inside this. I can probably insert a string inside this. So let's see how is that possible. So here I shall write down L1.append, and let me add in a tuple. So to add a tuple, what I'd want to do is, let's just give in these round braces. And inside this, let me just add probably 100, or let me make it 222, 333, and 444. Now, if I print out L1, you would see that I was able to add this tuple. So as you see, this entire tuple is an element in itself. Similarly, let's say if I want to add a new list inside this, I can do that. So here I shall write L1.append, and inside this I'll put in, so probably I'll have A, B, and C. Now let me print out L1 over here. Again, I've added a new list which comprises of these elements. Now let's say if I'd want to extract this element 333 from this entire list, let's see how can we do that. So let's start off by checking the index of this. So this should be present at index number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So this tuple is present at index number 7. So let me just write down L1 of 7 and I've extracted this. Now from this, what I'd want is this 333. So 333 is present at index number 1. So again, parenthesis 1. And as you see, I have successfully extracted this value 333 from this entire list. So this is basic processing, which you can do from a list. Now, going ahead, we have the next question. How can you multiply adjacent elements in a tuple? This is quite interesting. So let's create a tuple first. So let me add in a comment. Multiplying adjacent elements in a tuple. And let me go ahead and create a tuple for the same. I'll call this T5. And in this T5 tuple, what I'd want to do is, I just want to create a bunch of values first. So I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I've created this tuple. Let me print out T5 over here for you guys. So now that I've created this tuple, what I'd want to do is I'd want to multiply adjacent elements, which would mean that I would want 1 into 2, 2 into 3, 3 into 4, and 4 into 5. So for this, I'll be using two things. I'll be using a for loop and I'll be using the zip method. So let me show you how the zip method works first. So zip method obviously will be able to zip or combine two tuples together and make it one tuple. So here I'll write down T5 and T5. Here I shall probably write down. So from 1, I would need everything. I'll run this. Let me convert this into a tuple again. Let me copy this, paste it inside this tuple. And now when I run this, this is what we get. So what I have is, I have the same thing pairwise. So 1, 2 has become a pair. 2, 3 has become a pair. 3, 4 has become a pair. And 4, 5 has become a pair. Now it's very easy for me to multiply the elements which are present in this pair. So for that, I would need a for loop. So here I shall write down for I, comma j in this. So I would not need this tuple over here. Let me remove tuple from this. So for ij in zip of this, what I'd want to do is I'd want to multiply I and j. So I shall just write down I into j. I'll print I into j. So print of I into j, and I shall get the result. So as you see, I have this tuple, and by using this particular logic, I've been able to multiply the adjacent elements. So 1 into 2 is equal to 2, 2 into 3 is equal to 6, 3 into 4 is equal to 12, and 4 into 5 is equal to 20. So this is a very simple question which you are able to solve by using the zip method and also the for loop. So we will head to the next question now. So how do you sort a list in Python? This again is interesting. So let me create a list for that purpose. So let me write down list L1, and what I'll do is I'll have some values. L1 is equal to 5, 7, 8, 1, 3. Let me put in a comma between these two. So I guess these need to be enough. So I've created a list called as L1, and these are the values which are present inside this. Now, if I want to sort this list, I can just type in L1 dot sort. Now let me print in L1 over here, and you would see that these are all of the values which I have. So I've got 1, 3, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And by just using this simple sort method, I was able to sort all of the elements which are present in this list. Now, going ahead, we have the next question. What is a dictionary in Python? This again is a very interesting question. So till now we've worked with tuple and list. And when it came to tuple and list, we had stored individual elements inside them. Now, when it comes to a dictionary, what happens is we have something called as key value pair. And we had already seen one example of that. So let me create an example for this. So I'll create a dictionary called as D1. And to create a dictionary, you will use curly braces. So here I'm using curly braces, and I'd want to create a dictionary by using key value pairs. So here I shall write down K1. K1 is basically the key. After this, I need to give in some values. So here, let's say the value for K1 is 12. Then let me give in the next key, which would be K2. And let's say I give in a value of probably 23 for this. Then let me give in the next key, which would be K3. And for K3, let me give in the value 34. Then let me have K4. And for K4, I'll have, let's say, 45. So I have just created a dictionary over here which has all of these values. Let me print out D1 for you guys, and let me also check the type of this. Type of D1, and you would see that this is of type dict, which would basically mean that this is a dictionary. Now, these values which you see before the colon, those are the keys. These values which you see after the colon, those are the values. And if I want to individually extract the keys or separate out the keys and the values, that can be done. So from D1, if I want only the keys, I would write down D1.keys, and you would see that I've extracted the 4 keys which are present. I have K1, K2, K3, and K4. Similarly, if I'd want to extract only the values, here I shall write down D1.values, and you would see that I have been able to extract all of the values, which are 12, 23, 34, and 45. So this is a basic example of how you can work with a dictionary. So now that we have covered this, let's go to the next one. How do you change key name in dictionary? So when we talk about key names, so again, these what you see, these are the keys, K1, K2, K3, and K4. And if I'd want to change a particular key name, so let's say I have K1 over here, I'd want to change that K1 to probably L1. Let's see how that can be done. So I shall first, what we'd have to do is I'd have to pop this out. And when I'm popping this out, I'd have to add a new element instead of over there. So D1 is my dictionary. And what do I want to pop out? I'd want to pop out K1. And instead of K1, I'd want to add probably L1. So I'll have D1 K1 dot pop. And whatever I'm popping, I'd want to store it in L1. So just remember what we have over here. So this was our original dictionary, K1 going on till K4. I'm popping out K1 and the value will be stored in L1. So int doesn't have this. Let me see what is the error over here. D1 K1 dot pop. Let me remove this. So we get the same error. Probably I'll just write down pop over here. K1. What I'll do is I have D1 over here. I have K1, I get this. POP, or let me just use pop over here, D1, and inside this I shall just write down, probably I'll just write down over here K1, pop is not defined. So what I'll do is probably I'll just remove it out, D1 dot, let me just have K1 over here. Right, so I'll do this in a different way. I'll have D1 dot pop, and what I'll have to pop is basically K1. And once I pop this off, I will go ahead and store this in something called as L1. So this would be the right way to do that. Now, if I print out D1 over here for you guys, you would see that I have successfully changed this. So initially what I had over here is K1, and I've been able to change that to L1 over here. Now, similarly, let's say if I have this K2, I'd want to change it to L2. Let me go ahead and do that. So I'll have D1, and what I'd want to do is I shall do a similar thing, D1 dot pop. I'm popping out K2 and storing it in L2. Now I'll have D1 over here, and as you see, this is what I have. So this is how we can change a key name when it comes to a dictionary. So these are some basic questions which can be found when it comes to a dictionary. Now let's go ahead to the next one. How do you increment the values of a dictionary using a loop? And this is also something which is quite commonly asked. So what I shall do over here is, again, I shall create a new dictionary over here. I'll probably call it D2. And inside this, I'll have a key called as A1. I shall give it 1. Then I'll have a key called as A2. I shall give it the value 2. Then I shall have another key called as A3, and I shall give it a value of 3. Then I'll have A4, and I shall give it a value of 4. So now that I have created this dictionary, I have all of these values over here. What I'd want to do is I'd want to start a for loop. And with the help of that for loop, I'd want to increment all of these values. So here I shall write down for I in D2. Now let me just show you what would happen if I print out I over here. So for I in D2, print I. So what I'm printing over here is the keys. Now what I'd want to update is the values. So I will have I, and over here, this is, I need to change this to D2, and inside parenthesis, I'll have I. So D2 of I is equal to D2 of I plus 10. So what I'm doing over here is I'm updating each value over here with 10. So 1 will become 11, 2 will become 12, 3 will become 13, and 4 will become 14. Let me run this. Now, when I print out D2 over here, you shall see that all of the values have been successfully updated, right? So 1 has become 11, 2 has become 12, 3 has become 13, and 4 has become 14. So we have updated all of the values over here. So now that I have done this, what I'd want to do is, let me go ahead to the next question again. So what is a set in Python? So this again is quite important. So what we've covered till now is the basic data structures. So we've looked at tuple, we've looked at list, we've looked at dictionary. Next up, we have something called as a set. So here I shall add the comment set. And over here, what I'd want to do is, again, if you want to create a set, you would have to create a set by using curly braces. And the important feature about set is you cannot have duplicate values in a set. You can only have unique elements. Now, I'm creating a set like this. So I'll have S1 is equal to, now when I have something like this, now when I print out S1 for you, you would see that all of the duplicates have been removed. So here in the original set which I'm creating, I have 3 ones, but in the result, you would see that I have only 1. Then 2 I have 2 times, but here 2 I have only once. Again, here 3 I have 2 times. In the final result, 3 I have only once, because all of the duplicates have been removed. And this is how a set works. And a set is also unordered, which would mean that you cannot really maintain the order of a set. So this is all about a set. Next up, we have the next question. How do you test if a tuple is distinct? This is quite interesting. Now, when you say how to test if a tuple is distinct, you're basically asking if there are any duplicates present in a tuple or not, or if all of the elements in a tuple are unique or not. So since we've already checked what is a set, the best way to find out if a tuple is distinct or not would be to convert this tuple into a set and find out if the length of the tuple and the converted set is same or not. So here I shall create a tuple. Let me have 1, 1, 2, 2, and 3, 3. Now what I'd want to do is I'd want to convert this T1 into a set, and I will again convert that into a tuple. Let me copy this, paste this over here. Let me delete this. And this I shall store in T2. So I have T1 ready, which is equal to this. I have T2 ready, which is equal to this. Now I can just check the length of both of them. So length of T1 is double equal to length of T2, and I shall get a false value over here. I'm getting a false value because obviously the length of both of these tuples is not equal, which would mean that there are obviously duplicates present in the tuple which I've created. So this is how we can find out if a tuple is distinct or not. Next up, we'll see what do we have in the set of questions that we have created. So how do you test if a tuple is distinct, and how do you remove all of the duplicates from a list? So this again is sort of a similar question. So let's say if I have a list like this, I'll have 10, 10, 11, and 11. I shall have 12 and 12. I shall print this out for you guys. So you'd see that there are obviously duplicates present in this list. And if I'd want to remove these duplicates, what I would want to do is convert this into a set. So I will write down set, I will pass in L1 into this, and I shall again convert this into a list. So I'll copy this, I'll paste it inside this, I'll cut this out. Now, when I run this, you shall see that all of the duplicates have been removed. So your simple answer to find out if a tuple or a list, whether it has any duplicates or whether it is distinct or not, would be to just convert this into a set and find out the answer. As simple as that. Next up, how shall you find the greatest among three numbers using if-else statements? This is again a very common question. So let me write that down as a comment over here. Finding the greatest among three numbers using if-else. So first, I'd have to get three numbers over here. I'll have A, B, and C. So I'll have a variable called as A. Inside variable A, let me have the value 10. Then I'll have another variable B. Inside the variable B, I'll store the value 20. And I'll also have a variable called as C. And inside the variable C, I'll store the value 30. So now that I have these three variables ready, what I'd want to do is I'd want to check which of these is the greatest. So here, I shall write if A is greater than B and A is greater than C, then I'd want to print out A is the greatest. But if this turns out to be false, then what do I want to do? Well, if this turns out to be false, then I'll write elif. I'll check the condition for B. So if B is greater than A and B is greater than C, I would print out B is the greatest. Now, if both of these turn out to be false, what I'd want to do is I'll have the final else statement and I should just print out C is the greatest. Now you see that I get the result C is the greatest, and let's understand this properly. So here what is happening is I have 10 stored in A, 20 stored in B, and 30 stored in C. So we will come to the first if statement over here, and I'm checking if A is greater than B and A is greater than C. So is 10 greater than 20? No, it is false. Is 10 greater than 30? That is also false. So false and false is equal to false. That is why we skip this. Then we come to elif. Here we are checking if B is greater than A. Is 20 greater than 10? Yes, true. Then we are checking if B is greater than C. So is 20 greater than 30? No, that is false. So here we have true and false, which is equal to false. So we skip this. So since this is also false, we come to the final else statement and print out whatever is present in the final else statement. And what we are printing is C is the greatest. And that is how we find out the logic to find out which number is the greatest among a particular set of numbers. Next up, we have the next question over here. How shall you create this pyramid pattern? So pyramid patterns are again quite common when it comes to any interview. Again, so irrespective of the language, you are supposed to know the logic behind how to create these pyramid problems. So here, this is a very, very simple pyramid problem. We'll have one star at the top and it increases as the number of rows increases. So 1 star at the top, 2 stars in the second row, 3 stars in the third row, 4 stars in the fourth row. And it is quite simple to create this pyramid pattern with Python. So I will add a comment over here, pyramid pattern. And now that I have added this, I would start off by creating a for loop. So I shall write for I in range of 0 to 5. So this would be my outer loop. Then I'll have another loop. And inside this loop, I shall write down for j in range of 0 to I plus 1. Now, inside the inner loop, I'll just go ahead and print out star. Let me just write down star over here. And after this, what I'd want to do is, after I print a star, normally if I use a print statement, I'll get a new line. But I do not want to end it with a new line. I want to just end it with a space. And this is with respect to the inner loop. Now, once we're done with the inner loop, after every row, I want a new line. So I'll use the print statement over here. Let me run this. And as you see, we have been successfully able to print this pyramid pattern. And again, let's understand the logic over here. So for I in range of 0 to 5, so when we write down for I in range of 0 to 5, this outer loop will go from 0 to 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me just show that to you. For I in range of 0, 5, print of, let me add I over here. So for I in range of 0 to 5, let me print out I. You would see that this range goes from 0 to 4. Now, since we have these values going from 0 to 4, initially i's value is equal to 0. So I shall write down I is equal to 0. And over here for j in range of 0 to I plus 1. So I is 0, 0 plus 1 is 1. So this would become for j in range of 0 to 1. So in range of 0 to 1, which would mean that there is only one iteration. So in that one iteration, I'll print out this star. Now, once I'm done with this, I'll have a new line. And once I print out a new line, again, i's value is incremented. I's value now becomes 1. Is 1 less than 5? True. So since this is true, we'll again enter this inner loop. And over here, i's value has been incremented. It becomes 1. So here, this goes 0 to I plus 1. What is I? It is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. So this time the range is from 0 to 2, which will have two iterations, which are 0 and 1. Since this will have two iterations, we'll print 2 stars. After printing 2 stars, again, we'll have a new line. We'll go back. I's value is incremented. Now it becomes 2. We enter the inner loop. Here we shall again have I plus 1. I plus 1 is 2 plus 1, which is equal to 3. And since the range is 0 to 3, we'll have 3 iterations again, 0, 1, and 2. And since we have 3 iterations, we are printing out 3 stars. And this is the proper logic to print out your pyramid problem. So again, I hope this is clear for you guys as well. Next up, I will go to the next question. So this time I'm supposed to write a program to find out the factorial of a number. So, and for this, I will create a method. So here, let me just write down def, which would be a keyword to create a method. And after this, what I'll do is I will name this method as facto, and this will take in one variable, which is equal to x. Now, let me write down the proper logic over here. So a factorial is basic. So let's say if I'd want to find out 5 factorial, 5 factorial is essentially 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1. And here we'd have to keep 2 things in mind. 0 factorial is equal to 1. 1 factorial is equal to 1. And anything negative, that would be equal to 0. So basically, minus 1 factorial is equal to 0. So here I shall write down if x is double equal to 1, I shall have return 0. And if x is double, so let me change this to be equal to minus 1. And if x is double equal to 1 or x is double equal to 0, then what I'd have to return is 0 again. I'd have to return actually 1. And then I'll have the else statement. Else, which would mean that x is greater than 1. And here what I'm doing is I'm creating a new variable called as fact. And inside this, I'm storing a value 1. Now, once I do this, I'll have another while loop over here. And inside this while loop, I will again check while x is greater than 1. And while x is greater than 1, what I'd want to do is I'll write down fact is equal to fact into x, and here I shall write down x is equal to x minus 1. And once this is set, what I'll have to basically return is the value which is stored in fact. So I've created this, and inside this, let's say if I want to find out 5 factorial, I've passed in 5 and I've got the result 120. Let's again understand this. So let's say here the x value which I've passed in over here is 5, which is the x value. Now what would happen is I've passed in 5, and since I've passed in 5 over here, I'm checking while x is greater than 1, which would be I am checking if 5 is greater than 1. Since 5 is greater than 1, what is happening is fact is equal to fact into x. So fact is equal to 1, x is equal to 5. So 1 into 5 is equal to 5, and 5 is stored in fact. After that, x is equal to x minus 1. So x becomes 4. X becomes 4. I go back. Here I have 5 into 4. Now again I come back. X is equal to x minus 1. X becomes 3. So here I shall have 5 into 4 into 3. Similarly, x is equal to x minus 1, which is equal to 2. Then I shall have 5 into 4 into 3 into 2. And then finally, when I have x is equal to x minus 1, the value of x becomes equal to 1. And since x is equal to 1, I come out of this for loop, and the final value inside fact will be 5 into 4 into 3 into 2, which is equal to 120. So this is how we'll be able to create a simple factorial program using a method. We'll go to the next question over here. So give an example of lambda function. So again, lambda functions are quite interesting. So when it comes to lambda functions, you can consider these to be anonymous functions or nameless functions. So here what we've done is we've created a function, a proper function by using the def method. But if we'd want to create, normally you'd be writing really lengthy programs, and sometimes you just want one-liner functions which would do basic calculations. And for those purposes, lambda functions are the best. So let me just show you how it's done. So first you need to write down lambda. Then you shall pass in the argument. If it has an argument, then just write down the argument over there, put in a colon. And after colon, write down the body. So here, let's say I want to create a function which will multiply my given number by 2. So I shall just write down x into 2. Now, if I just have this like this, what I have is function main dot lambda. So let me just go ahead and store this in a variable. I'll call this variable as p. And inside p, I will pass in 5. You would see that the value has become 10. I've just created a very simple lambda function. And in that lambda function, I've passed in the value 5. And the result I've got is 10. So you can create simple nameless anonymous functions using lambda. Next up, let's see what do we have. So we've got how to create a 1D array and 2D array using Numpy array. So now we are up to the Numpy library. So let me just give you a context of the Numpy library. So Python has different libraries, and one of those important libraries is Numpy. And with the help of Numpy, as the name itself states, you can perform numerical computation. And Numpy also provides you different arrays. And you will have one-dimensional arrays, you will have two-dimensional arrays, and also multiple higher dimensional arrays. And you can perform different operations or different numerical operations on top of all of these arrays. So I'll just give you a simple example of how to create a simple 1D array as well as a 2D array. So here I shall write down import numpy as np. And now that I have created this, I've actually imported the Numpy library. Now that I've imported the Numpy library, what I'd want to do is I'd want to create a single one-dimensional array. So if I'd want to create a one-dimensional array, I shall write down np.array. And inside this, let me give in certain values. So I shall write 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I shall store this in a new object and call it as n1. And when I print out n1 over here, this is what I get. Let me also check the type of this. Type of n1, you would see that this is a numpy nd array, which would mean that this is a numpy n-dimensional array. Here the value of n is equal to 1, which is a one-dimensional array. Similarly, let me go ahead and create a two-dimensional array. So to create a two-dimensional array, what I'd have to do is I'd have to pass in a list of lists. So in the first list, I'll have values 1, 2, and 3. In the second list, I'll have values 4, 5, and 6. And I'll go ahead and store this in a new object, and I'll call that object as n2. And when I print out n2 over here, this is what I get. So you would see that this is a two-dimensional array over here where I have 2 rows and 3 columns. Again, if I check the type of this, type of n2, you would see that this is a numpy nd array, which is a numpy n-dimensional array. So folks, I believe we've covered enough topics in today's session, and we are left with a lot of questions. What we shall do is we shall conduct probably a next session after this, and in the next session we shall look at different topics again. So in the next session we shall probably cover something related to pandas, we shall cover something related to matplotlib and seaborn as well. So until then, thank you very much, and we again have another live session at 9 p.m. today, which will be taken by Mohit. And that live session would be a live mock interview, and that would be related to system design. So if you want to know how a mock interview related to system design works, please do attend our 9 p.m. session today. So folks, thank you very much, and let's meet again in the next one.